Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where and when you're watching this broadcast. I'm Thomas Fessler, my friends, and this is Disclosure Tonight. Happy Friday. It's Friday Night Disclosure for Friday, July 19th, 2024. How about that? As we all come together as a community to talk about those things that our government doesn't want us talking about, to talk about those things from science fiction. And well, folks, talk about those things, from the X-Files. What things are we talking about? We're talking about the things that you can go out and see over your house some evenings, but you just need to go outside and look up. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you here. We've got a great guest tonight, Grant Lavac, who's talking to us about disclosure from down under. Well, Australia for that matter. It's going to be one heck of a great show. We've got a great panel and everybody to be here tonight. Before we get to that, let me go ahead and bring up the drums and bring out our audience. Let's see who we have in our audience, folks. Let me bring up that list. Checking it once, checking it thrice. Aubrey McLeod is here, along with... let me get those. Turn that down a little bit. Turn that up a little bit. There we go. Let's see what we have there. Aubrey McLeod. Charles Kerr's here. Charles Kerr. Good to see you, Charles. Fireflies around along with Frank and Stein. Jay Katz here along with Kathy. Kelly Broat and those piercing blue eyes. I know you're not there yet, Kathy, but you'll be there. Kelly, but you'll be there in a second. King Bull's here along with Little Sism. Morgan is around, Mr. Catfish 2100. Europe, good to see you, Catfish. Rachel Osborne's here along with Resonate. Shelly Montgomery, oh my God, Shelly, we love you, my dear girl. Would you look at that? Ruth just showed up. Good to see you, Ruth. Super Unknown's here as well as Watching Vids 2.0. How about that? You got the 2.0? I didn't even know we went past 1.4. How about that? Well, on that note, it's that time of night, friends, to go ahead and welcome in our panel. Let's see who we have back there today. Well, a friend of ours who's coming in from Bristol, United Kingdom. Let's welcome in our dear friend, Andy W. How's it going, Andy?
Hey, Thomas. Yeah, not too bad. It's been a warm one for us here in the UK today. I hope anybody who's from England's not been suffering too much.
Warm one? Oh my gosh. It's 64 degrees there now. You have a high of 71 and a low of 61. How can you say it's warm?
My car hit excuse me, so I'm still getting over this. My car hit 91 in your money, 31 today.
Oh, is that because you were sitting on a blacktop in the sun in a dark car?
It's a red car, but yeah, it was. Yeah, we're not used to the hot weather. We've got warm, houses to keep us warm in the winter.
Oh, do you have you mean in other words, you have brick houses that keep you warm, or concrete keeps you warm in the winter, but even warmer in the summer, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, yeah, I hear you.
It's really great to see Grant and everybody here tonight. It's going to be a good show.
I would hope so. Turning our sights back on the United States. I didn't even realize. I have to look in my mind where she's from. Let's welcome in our dear remote viewing coordinator friend, Laura. How's it going, Laura?
It's going great, Thomas. And project for me later this week is going to be Crane, Indiana. There's a Naval Support Activity Center, NAVSEA, and it's a warfare center, but I'm going to be looking deep underground and seeing what they have hiding there.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Let's bring out do me a favor. When you get a chance with your crew of people, since you're the one who guides those who are doing the remote viewing, have them take a look at the coordinate 0, 0, 0. Center of the Earth. Let's see what they see.
Okay, I know another group did that recently, and it wasn't just molten lava. It was energy.
Yes, it
Waves
is.
of energy. Yeah.
I did that one, and you know what it looked like? I did it, and I had my eyes open, and I was doing the remote viewing, going down to that point, and I was looking to it, and I went, bam. And it's like, ow. And I did it a second time. Bam. Yeah. And the third time I realized I was looking at something that was spinning. But then when I was able to get it up and going, this is doing eyes open samadhi meditation on top of your regular visual stuff, which is a lot harder. I actually saw this thing was like this white glob that had like all these lines of spaghetti going off in all these different directions. It looked like a plasma ball.
Okay. I look forward to that.
I can't wait to see what your team brings up next.
Torture me.
Oh, I know. Can't wait to see where it's going. Let's take a look who else we have in the back. Well, we have another friend coming all the way from Australia. I got 3 people from Australia today. Let's welcome in our dear friend Mark Kyle. How's it going, Mark?
Yeah, good, Thomas. Good, Thomas. It's pretty cool here today. Andy's hot and we're cold. Well, cold for us anyway. Looking forward to the show and good to see Grant.
I'm missing your camera, my friend, but good to see you earlier before the show. Great to have you here. Who else do we have in the back? Well, we've got our friend coming in from a little bit further south from me, a little bit warmer, potentially. Let's welcome in our dear friend, Nick. How's it going, Nick? It's always a challenge. Let's move on. Well, another one of our friends we have from Australia. Would you look at that? It's not, I could say it's none of your business, but it's our very own Susan Ford. How's it going, Susan?
It's going pretty good. It's about time you got some talent on the show there, Thomas.
Jesus. Well, we got some good friends from down under. How about that? You know, that's why I had to call the show Disclosure from Down Under. I wasn't sure what to call it, but I think that works, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, how about that? Thank you for coming in today, Susan. And let's wrap ourselves back to Southern California, the place you ought to be. Our dear friend FaZe Will is here. How's it going, Will?
Hello, Thomas. Good to see you, bud. Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you here, my friend, as well. Well, I think that wraps it up almost because Mike's not here. He's off with the family on a shopping adventure. I think we'll call it that. That's a good way to put it. But anyway, on that note, let's go ahead and say enough of that schmuckery, my friend. Where is the... Let's put that record off to the side and welcome in our guest for the night, Mr. Grant Lavac. Now, Grant is a husband, a father, a filmmaker, a student of FOIA, maybe from John Greenwald, you never know, a UFO UAP researcher, and creator of the Unexplained Rundown podcast on YouTube from Down Under. Let's welcome in our very good friend here, Grant. How you doing today, my friend?
I'm good, Thomas. Thanks for inviting me to come on and have a chat. Always happy to have a conversation with anyone that's keen to have a yarn. And it's good to see some fellow Aussies on with you. So it's great to be talking with you, your panel, and your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, UFOs for me is a passion, but it's also a hobby. And I know you're a husband, you're a father, you got a lot of stuff going on. You put off a podcast once a month, but you're on Twitter a lot, going and bringing stuff out. And like we were talking about earlier, it's almost like a full-time job. But I have to ask you a question, since you're new to the show here and a lot of people haven't met you before. What hooked you and brought you into this whole thing called Disclosure?
Right, yeah. Well, hook, line, and sinker for many years, and I agree with you. I am on X quite a bit, probably more than my wife would like me to be. And I've always said that marriage and the UAP UFO topic don't always go hand in hand.
Bookmark
together,
the things you want to retweet and retweet it later.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good idea. I like that. No, but in terms of my interest in this topic, I mean. I'm a child of the 80s. When I was a young fella, probably 7 or 8 years of age, can't remember. It was the mid to late 80s, and I'm originally from Sydney, Australia, born and raised. And my father took me to there was a UFO photo exhibition in Australia's tallest building. Our skyscraper back then was called Sydney Centrepoint Tower. It's kind of like the Seattle Needle, whatever the
No, I'm from Seattle. We have the Space Needle, but I'm also from Chicago, where we have the Sears Tower. I get the tallest buildings, yes.
So Sydney Centrepoint Tower kind of looks like Seattle Space Needle, and they had this UFO photo exhibition at Sydney Centrepoint Tower, and it was basically all the famous, black and white photos from the 50s and decades past, and one of them was the famous McMinnville photo, and it was kind of blown up on a canvas on display. And I remember just staring at that photo for a good 10, 15 minutes, just imagining what fascination or fright that farmer or rancher must have had when they were capturing that photograph for a fleeting moment. And
I think this is a tower here, right?
Yeah, that's it. It's good old Center Point.
There
It's
you
now
go.
called Sydney, Sydney Tower, I think. But that's our kind of like a little bit similar to the Space
It is,
Needle.
yeah.
And so they had this photo exhibition at the top there, and just these incredible photos, and that really caught my fascination and curiosity from a young age. And then, obviously, growing up as a teenager in the 90s, for my fellow Aussies, Mark and Nuno are on every Wednesday night, 9 p.m. The X-Files would be on, and so I wouldn't miss it without fail. And then you do a big debrief with your schoolmates the next day, and you talk about it. And then obviously growing up as an adult, my interest kind of waned. It ebbed and flowed a bit. But like for so many folks, it wasn't until the bombshell articles came out in 2017, the New York Times, where that really sparked my interest and got my eyebrows raising. And then obviously throughout COVID, so many of us were spending so much more time at home. And where I'm from, where I live now, Melbourne, Australia, we were locked down more than any other city on the planet. So
more than almost more than China, for that matter, because they had police out there going ahead and checking your IDs, detaining people, throwing people in jail. It was crazy for what was going on.
We at one point we had curfews where you could only go out for exercise, for 1 hour a day. It was just nuts. So throughout COVID, because we all had so much more time on our hands, I really kind of became a sponge on the topic, and there was so much obviously happening, since December of 2017. So I just jumped back into the topic and tried to learn and get up to speed with as much as I could and learn from as many people as I could. And there was a 3-day activism event in September of 2021. I think it was called the Big Phone Home 2. Which I stumbled across, and I always credit Luis Jimenez for kind of getting me off my ass and into the game and trying to engage my elected representatives on the topic.
If you only knew what an ass he was.
Well, look, I know personal feelings aside that you have.
No, I actually got to learn that up front.
but my point being, that's kind of what really.
It got a lot of people going. Got a lot of people. And you know what I have to say for Lou Jimenez? There hasn't been another event like the Big Phone Home since the Big Phone Home was around. Just saying. It brought together so many people. The Phone Home 1, the Phone Home 2, etc. It really connected the community in a way that we haven't seen.
Yeah, and I mean, I was fortunate enough and privileged to be invited to participate in the third iteration that he ran. But to his credit, it was an extraordinary grassroots movement to get everyday folks like me, but predominantly from the US, that were interested in the topic and took it seriously to engage their elected representatives and try and advocate for them to take it seriously. So it got me thinking, well, with all of these folks in the US like me that are curious on this topic and do take it seriously, what is Australia doing about this topic? So it got me asking some questions back home. And unfortunately, Australia has been doing very little on the topic, despite the fact that not a lot of people know this, that Australia has almost as long as a history investigating the UAP UFO topic as the US does, dating back to the early 50s.
And I have to say, the documents that Australia put out detailing their surveillance of the UFO topic going back from the 50s all the way up through the 70s, and they released all the information. Australia was really going toe-to-toe with a lot of stuff the U.S. was saying, researching it, trying to figure it out. We covered the Australian UFO files, and when they were released, that was like 3 or 4 days of getting through documents, and it was absolutely amazing what Australia did. So they were watching everybody else's stuff, but truly when it comes down to talking about any of the things they're involved with UFO and UFOs, UAPs, if you want to call it, from that particular manner, they're even more locked down than our friends in the United Kingdom are.
Yeah, and that document, I remember you covering that on your show. It's an incredible document that was authored by a gentleman by the name of Harry Turner, who is an Australian nuclear scientist who took an interest in the topic and then was charged with actually investigating it. Eric Weinstein and Jesse Michaels have covered that document, that minute paper from 1971 from the Joint Intelligence Organization. It's just a truly fascinating document. So Australia has had this long history of investigating the topic. And then in 1996, the Royal Australian Air Force, who for many years were charged with taking lead on the topic, they basically said, move along, folks. They wiped their hands clean and said, move along, folks, nothing to see here. And they ceased their investigation in the topic altogether. And basically they cited the reason being they could not find any, a direct quote was they could not find any scientific or other compelling reason to continue to devote resources to the ongoing investigation of UAP. Now, that was 96. We live several decades beyond that. 2024 is a very different landscape on the UAP UFO topic.
Almost 30 years now, my friend.
Yeah, almost 30 years. And, Australia is just, the Royal Australian Air Force and Australian Department of Defence are just completely burying its head burying its head in the sand on this topic, because our Five Eyes ally and AUKUS partner and US allies taking this very, very seriously, and they've stated time and time again that UAP is not an issue that's isolated to the United States. It's a global phenomenon.
Bingo. And that was actually even a year ago in March. There was a statement that came out from the Space Force.
That's right.
Yeah, you got it.
Exactly
You
right.
got it, my friend. Yes.
And it's clear that the Department of Defense, even AARO and members of Congress have clearly stated time and time again that UAP represent a clear and present danger to national security and safety of flight risk. And despite that fact, the Australian Department of Defense is just completely playing the ignorance is bliss card and not taking the topic seriously and affording its defense personnel any reporting protocols or mechanisms at all. So there's currently no mechanisms in place that allow members of the Australian Defence Force to report an observation or an incursion, incident with UAP, despite the fact that you have Ross Coulthart, who we all know, saying that he's had Australian F-35 pilots in his living room, sitting down with him and saying, look, we're seeing anomalous objects in our airspace that we can't identify and reconcile. And we're not reporting it to our higher ups because there's still this massive level of stigma and ridicule that plagues the topic. And why would they report it if it's not going to go anywhere?
But if you're calling it, and that's what they're calling it, is stigma and ridicule. But from our perspective and your perspective, Grant, what you're talking about is a cover-up to the people who are witnessing and engaging with this particular phenomenon, and they're being shut down and they're being, well, ridiculed for that matter, and what they're saying is not being taken seriously by the government. Exactly. Maybe it is, but it's behind the curtain for that matter.
Well, and if you watch the latest Need to Know with Ross Coulthart and Bryce Zabel, Ross is now saying that he's having conversations with folks covert conversations with folks in the Australian Intelligence Service that are now starting to take this topic seriously because I was able to bring to light through the Freedom of Information Act a key document that showed that AARO's Five Eyes Forum on UAP that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick announced to the world in May of last year when he was talking at NASA's public meeting on UAP with the independent study team. Well, that Five Eyes Forum on UAP was officially called the Five Eyes inaugural UAP caucus working group. So you've got all of the Five Eyes countries, and for the benefit of your audience, that's the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, convening for an all-day briefing meeting at the Pentagon on the 24th of May of last year, talking about UAP, and AARO, to its credit, doing what it was congressionally mandated to do. One of its duties, as per the legislation, is to coordinate with allies and international partners of the United States to better understand the nature and extent of UAP. And so all of these Five Eyes partners came together to learn what AARO is doing, to share, collaborate, intelligence sharing, and so on. And it makes me think, well, what did Australia have to bring to the party, bring to the table, and add to the conversation when it hasn't investigated the topic since 1996. It doesn't have any recording or reporting protocols in place whatsoever for members of the Defence Force. At the moment, if you're in the defence and you see a UAP, the guidance is call the cops or reach out to your local civilian UFO organization, like the likes of MUFON and so on.
Right.
And documents that I've been able to secure for release through the Australian Freedom of Information Act show, unambiguously that Australia had absolutely no desire to collaborate with allies on the topic of UAP. And now they're kind of forced into the conversation following this invite from AARO to attend this Five Eyes UAP caucus working group. And now you have folks covertly saying to Ross Coulthart and the intelligence community that, yes, we are now starting to take this topic seriously more than we have in the past. And I find that very, very interesting. So, and I do suspect that the Australian Defence Force, being the Royal Australian Air Force, the Army, the Navy, Defence Space Command, they probably know very, very little in contrast to the Defence Intelligence Organisation, which historically was called the Joint Intelligence Organization, which was on the letterhead of that document that you referenced before, the 1971 document by Harry Turner. And before that, it was called the Joint Intelligence Bureau. So that organization, today known as the Defence Intelligence Organization, has a long history investigating the topic. And I can say with a high degree of confidence that it was a representative from the Australian Defence Intelligence Organisation that attended AARO's Five Eyes UAP caucus working group in May of last year. So the intelligence services in Australia are engaging with the US, and I suspect taking this topic more seriously than it has in the past.
Now, here's the question I have to ask. Do you think their shutdown on this topic, which has been going on for a long time, is linked to potentially what's been going on in the United States? Or is it possible that Australia has had its Roswell moment as well?
Well, we certainly have, and my fellow Aussies on the call would know that on the 6th of April of 1966 in Westall in Victoria, not far from Melbourne, which is where I live, we had the famous Westall flying saucer incident where several hundred school children and a couple of high school teachers witnessed what they described to be between 1 and 3. It's a bit ambiguous as to how many there were in total, but 1 and 3 objects in the sky above their high school that resembled flying saucers.
And this is before the incident happened in Zimbabwe for the aerial school.
94, I think. 94 might have been. Comparable, a lot of school children. And what's so fascinating about that case, which I've investigated quite comprehensively, is that 58 years later, there is still no official commentary, documentation, explanation from the Australian federal government, state government, local government, the Australian Defence Force as to what it was that was observed in the skies of and towards the ground of Westall High School and a densely wooded area called the Grange, which is about a mile south of the school. And that's so fascinating that there are no documents that can be located within the National Archives of Australia pertaining to the Westall incident, despite the fact that it's long been suggested that the Department of Supply, which is now defunct, investigated the Westall incident and compiled a comprehensive report on it. And that report has never seen the light of day.
Now, is there methods to go ahead and keep documents like that out of the public purview? Like in the United States, we have the National Security Act that was actually put in place back in 1947. We also have the, the act back in 1952 to take anything to deal with the Nuclear Energy Act that happened that basically said anything to deal with anything that deals with the decay of radioactive material, we're able to keep that stuff secret. Do you have similar to that within the Australia as well?
Well, so Australia, we don't have any nuclear capabilities. I mean, we have a nuclear facility in Lucas Heights, which is to do with is not to do with the generation of nuclear power, but Australia is part of this AUKUS, this trilateral alliance with the US, the UK, and we're about to spend $500 billion on some Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines. So
right, because the money got shifted from going to France for diesel-powered, then to the United States for nuclear-powered, right?
Exactly. And you want to talk about wastage. I mean, we had to, Australia had to compensate the French government $900 million or something ridiculous, to get out of that agreement. And now we're spending $500 billion with the US. So we're going to have a nuclear capability in terms of nuclear-powered submarines. And with all of the information that we know that UAP are long known to have an association with the nuclear element, Australia better bring itself up to speed on the relationship between UAP and nuclear, because we're going to have. So, I mean, look at the Nimitz incident, for example. The Nimitz attack carrier group. The Nimitz was a nuclear-powered carrier, and look what happened in 2004. But to go back to your point, so not on certainly there are those secrets, core secrets with respect to the Department of Energy in the United States and so on. What we face here in Australia is obviously any documents that I want to, if I want to exercise my right to information and go after documents through the Australian Freedom of Information Act, which is pretty comparable with that in the US.
Right.
The turnaround times are just a lot faster in Australia. We certainly have similar kind of exemptions that you do in the US. If there's anything that the Australian Department of Defence, as an example, believes that would be a threat to national security or threaten any international relations with, say, the United States, there are exemptions in place to have that information refused for release or redacted altogether. So, and I come up against that time and time again. I mean, I've requested the memorandum of understanding for and operational requirement documents for the new space surveillance telescope in, I think it's Western Australia, and they knocked me back on that document in its entirety because of, on the grounds of national security and international relations in the United States. So you'll come up against those similar kind of national security exemptions time and time again in Australia, just like John Greenwald Jr. is doing with a lot of his requests in the States. But outside of that, no, there's nothing that I'm aware of. But the Department of Supply's, more than long rumored report on the Westall incident is a classic example. There are folks that are with a high degree of confidence can say that there was a comprehensive report put together, but again, it's never seen the light of day. So either it was destroyed or it was intentionally buried.
I mean, we're almost looking at 55 years since then, aren't we?
Well, since Westall, 58 years.
58 years.
It's crazy. And you would think that if it was something that was, as it's been suggested, one of the hypotheses that a great UAP researcher in Australia, Keith Basterfield, who I've gotten to know.
Oh, he's a great guy. You know him?
Well, I've really had an opportunity to learn from him directly, and he's certainly been able to. I consider he's a good mentor in many respects of what I've done on FOIA and research. But he put together a hypothesis, and it was only a hypothesis as a prosaic explanation, that what was observed in the skies of Westall High School on the 6th of April 1966 was a high-altitude balloon, or acronym being HIBAL, because there was a top-secret project operating out of Mildura, which is several hundred kilometres northwest of Melbourne, in the 60s, that sent up these high-altitude balloons that was designed to detect or kind of sniff the air for radioactive remnants of nuclear testing in the Pacific region. And
well, so don't forget they called Roswell a balloon incident as well.
That's right. So that's why we kind of have our comparable Roswell incident. But if you listen to what a lot of these primary witnesses of the Westall incident have said, and I had the opportunity of interviewing a number of them April of last year, and I put it together in a documentary on my YouTube channel, which is just shy of 90 minutes. And you listen to them, and I remember looking them directly in the eye throughout every word they said, and they have such compelling recollections and testimony of that day, and all of them, unambiguously say, no, it was not a balloon that we saw. It was definitely something else. And they all knew what balloons looked like in terms of hot air balloons and those sorts of things. I mean, obviously a high altitude balloon looks quite different, but when you're on site, when you're actually on location where one of these incidents like Westall occurred, I was able to get a sense of the environment, look up in the sky. You can see there's an airport, a small airport that's only a couple of kilometers away, and you can see how low these light aircraft fly above the skies of Westall. And it could not have been a prosaic object like a light aircraft, because it would have been easily identifiable. And considering the fact that you've got reports that this object descended, it made contact with the ground or hovered just above it in this densely wooded area called the Grange. If something like that is descending over the skies of their school, you would imagine it's getting pretty low, and they would be able to identify, differentiate what is in the sky. And so many of them, say it resembled that of a flying saucer, not just those that were on site at Westall High School. Even a witness that was several kilometres away in a neighbouring high school, she saw it from her school playground that something resembled a flying saucer that was banking and turning. So I just found the testimony to be so compelling and interesting. And it's just so frustrating that for many researchers like myself, Keith Basterfield, another one, Bill Chalker, and Shane Ryan, who's really been the lead researcher on the Westall incident for many, many years now, we've been unable to secure any documentation from government or the Australian Department of Defence that would give any indication as to what it was that was observed in the skies of Westall High School in 1966. And that leaves the case as a truly mysterious, unresolved cold case 58 years later.
Yeah, we have those same instances going in the United States, and you just have to look back, and you just have to look back at it and say, there's a reason why they're going ahead and covering it up. It's because it's that good of an incident. It's something where it can't be denied by the people who are seeing this stuff. And it gets into the point of, if you get into the point of plausible deniability and they can't get behind it and say what all these people said, what didn't happen, if you don't talk about it, you don't acknowledge it in that particular manner, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and that's one of the key frustrations for so many of these primary witnesses that I spoke to last year, is that the fact that they were told to shut up about it, and they were told to keep their mouth shut, and even the headmaster of the school, convened a special assembly later that day and said, you're not to talk about anything you've seen today. And there were many witnesses that recollect, military and government officials being on site in the school before the day was out and cordoning off an area, south of the school, this Grange area, where there are reports of trucks going in, folks in military attire with what resembled metal detector hardware, and taking soil samples from the Grange area. So if it was such a prosaic event,
you wouldn't see all these things, right?
Exactly. Which it was so prosaic. Why 58 years later has there never been any formal confirmation or announcement as to?
Because if all these things went on, right? They should be able to come out and say, well, we did this test, we did this test, we did this test. All these different things we checked, there was nothing there, nothing there, nothing there. Here are the results for you to go ahead and check out. But it's just, rather than, it's a deniability going on versus just a blanket, versus coming in and using the scientific facts they would have had in follow-up to go ahead and back up what they're saying. But clearly, they're not even bringing the results of any of those forward. Do you know if anyone has tried to get the results on any of those tests?
So I know that for many years, there was the Victorian UFO Research Organization, UFOS, I think it was called, which is now defunct, but they were heavily involved in interviewing some of the primary witnesses in the days after it happened, and I think they engaged some scientists to do some possibly soil sampling. I'm not entirely sure, but there has been no documentary evidence that has ever seen the light of day as to what the military was doing on site, what they collected, what they tested. There's just been nothing. Nothing has ever come to light showing any government involvement, and military involvement, even though the witnesses recall that vividly.
Yeah,
and that's puzzling. 58 years later, it's puzzling. I only dived down one very small rabbit hole and covered just the the testimony from a very small number of primary witnesses, but the fact that you've got several hundred children that have seen something anomalous in the sky, and a teacher as well, who his name was Andrew Greenwood. He was 20 years of age on the day that it happened, and then you have uniformed military officers coming to his home, knocking on his door, unannounced, unsolicited, unwelcomed, and basically saying, "Shut up about it," because it would be, if you don't, it'll be very easy for folks to believe
you were drinking, right?
That you were drinking, that you were drunk. And you
so
could
they
lose your
basically
job
came
and
to
so
the
on.
guy's door, and he almost said, I could have sworn
he was threatened.
He was threatened, but he thought there was someone there from the United States who was along with him as part of that crew that came in and threatened him. That's crazy. They threatened him with his career and his life to say, if you say anything, talk about this, you're going to get taken down.
Yep, and he went on the record I think it was a year after the Westall incident happened. He sat down with, I can't remember his first name, McDonald, who came out to Australia, and he was from, I think, the University of Arizona. My memory's failing on his first name, but he came out and sat down with Andrew Greenwood, and there's a recording which you can access on YouTube to this day of that conversation, his testimony to that gentleman McDonald. So yeah, it's Westall's just a fascinating case, and I mean, what's also interesting about Westall is, neighboring or adjacent to this densely wooded area known as the Grange, there's a golf course called Spring Valley Golf Course, which is a beautiful 18-hole course, which was built the year that Roswell happened in 1947, and it's been long rumored that the groundskeeper of that golf course had told his son, the groundskeeper's since deceased, but his son said he remembered his dad, being the groundskeeper, say that there were some golfers on the 8th hole of Spring Valley Golf Course that there was this big commotion on the 8th green. They saw something descending towards the ground, the densely wooded area known as the Grange. And so I tried to, as part of the documentary that I did, I went out and had a round of golf at the Spring Valley Golf Club, which cost a bomb because it's a pretty exclusive course. And I wanted to film from the vantage point of what these golfers may have seen from the 8th green of the day, because the landscape and the environment has not changed that much since 1966. So that was just a point of difference that I was able to add in my little documentary, which I've always kind of said I think it serves as a good companion piece to what Shane Ryan's put out with the documentary he was involved in a number of years ago called Westall 66, a suburban UFO mystery. James Fox obviously covered the Westall incident in The Phenomenon that he put out in 2020, and Ross Coulthart has even investigated the Westall incident and done some documentaries for 7 Spotlight, one of the Australian news media outlets here in Oz. But it continues to be an incident that just completely intrigues and fascinates me, and it's my hope that one day there'll be someone that comes forward with some information that hasn't been revealed before, some documentary evidence that can help shed further light on what happened that day.
Absolutely. Now, Andy, you live in the United Kingdom, and you have a similar government with respect to deniability on anything and everything with regards to UAP.
Yeah, 100%. Same sort of thing that happened in Australia by the sounds of it. We had the office that Nick Pope was running,
the MOD, right?
He was dealing with it, and then they shut that down. We aren't researching it. Almost you could paraphrase what Grant's just said. Their comments were with it. It's almost like a reading from a script. I don't believe they shut it down, and I don't believe that they shut down in Australia. I think there are offices, there are people still looking into these things. I don't believe they've totally shut down. There's still stuff going on. It's happened in America. You had Blue Book and all of those different copycat. You've gone right through to AARO, and even now, AARO is sort of still here by the looks of it. But if AARO goes, somebody else will take over. And I think it's an ongoing thing that's never stopped in any of the Five Eyes countries.
You raise a good point, Andy, and that's one of the threads that I'm trying to pull, because what I've found fascinating is that, you know, the Australian Department of Defence is saying, well, we haven't investigated UAP, UFOs, or the vernacular that was used in Australia decades past was unusual aerial sightings, or UAS. That was the term that was used. But, you know, the Australian Department of Defence has said, move along, folks, nothing to see here since 1996. But what I find very interesting is that, you know, irrespective of what you think of these two gentlemen, you've got folks like Chris Bledsoe and Dr. Stephen Greer, who have in the last really, 12, 24 months come out, and Dr. Greer has said on 3 occasions publicly on podcasts that he briefed a former Australian Minister of Defence about a decade ago.
But you just got to take everything you hear from Dr. Greer with a grain of salt.
And look, you have to, but it's my, as a researcher, I need to try and stay as neutral as I can and very much trust but verify, right? If someone makes a claim, I'm going to do my best to try and track down information that either supports that claim or rejects it, or serves as a rebuttal. So Dr. Stephen Greer has made this claim that he briefed a former Australian Minister for Defence in possibly 2013, which would have been then a gentleman by the name of Stephen Smith, who's now the Australian ambassador for the UK. So that's a thread that's a rabbit hole I'm trying to follow. And then you have folks like Chris Bledsoe have come out and said also on numerous podcasts twice in the last year, I believe, or a bit over a year. And he said this recently on an X Space where I asked, was able to have my question asked, that he has alleged, he's claimed that he has had not just the Australian Department of Defence, a representative from the Australian Department of Defence, but he's also said NASA, the FBI, the CIA, Pentagon, engage him on his experiences. So if those prove to be true, which I'm very skeptical of, but I have
should
to
be.
Follow, it could be, but if it
I can guide you from the pinnacle of disclosure of the United States. Not a man to be trusted.
Dr. Stephen Greer, I'm very dubious of, but
should be.
Chris Bledsoe, I have had engagement with folks that are very intelligent and very credible.
Well, there's been some really interesting people that have gone to Chris Bledsoe's house, including the top Lou, probably along the lines of potentially Colonel John Alexander, and many others who are involved with the disclosure movement have all come out to hang out with them and check this stuff out. And you don't have anyone raising a flag saying, no, this stuff isn't happening.
Well, Tim Taylor is another one, another mysterious gentleman that was a contractor for NASA. But if we play if we speculate for a second and say if both Dr. Stephen Greer or Chris Bledsoe, or even one of them, what they're claiming is true, then you've got the Australian Department of Defence engaging on the topic and obviously wanting to learn more. Post 1996, where they said, no, we're not, there's no compelling or scientific reason. Why are they taking an interest in a topic?
Because they've been interested in it. They've never not been interested in it, and it's a cover-up.
And that goes to Andy's point, that I think there is certainly there's this public, there's this strategic narrative that the UK Ministry of Defence, and the Australian Department of Defence are putting out there that, move along, folks, there's nothing to see here.
But what you need I would have to say is you need someone like that Tim Burchett somewhere in your representative government to get out there and start saying this stuff is real. It's a cover-up. I don't believe the government. I'm part of it, but it's a cover-up from the Defense Department. But you need to, I guess, in the United States, we've had those forces here that have been saying it, and maybe that's a moment to get started. Do you have anybody in Australian Parliament or I believe it's called Parliament,
do.
right?
Yeah, the Australian Parliament. Well,
Yeah.
I feel for my brothers and sisters in the UK, because Andy knows that, I don't believe any members of Parliament that are asking questions about UAP in a UK context, but there is in Australia. There's a senator by the name of Peter Wish-Wilson who, when ODNI published its June 2021 preliminary assessment on UAP, he had been apprised that he read that, and so he asked the then Chief of Air Force, his name was Air Marshal Mel Hupfield, in a Senate estimate, which was kind of like a budget estimate or budget oversight hearing. He pressed on the 27th of October of 2021, the then Chief of Air Force on this preliminary assessment that had been released by the ODNI, and said, well, what is Australia doing about UAP? Do we have any recording or reporting protocols? You've got reports of UAP, the US Department of Defense having to cancel training exercises because of these incursions by UAP. So he pressed the then Chief of Air Force on UAP in Australian context, and he really got a lot of non-answers. And again, move along, folks, there's nothing to see here. So Senator Wish-Wilson didn't just stop there. He has continued to press the Chief of Air Force. He did that in November of 2022, and he did it in February of last year, around the same time that the Chinese spy balloon and the unidentified aerial objects were shot down by the US Air Force. And so he has continued to ask questions.
Had the Chinese spy balloon, and then the 3 additional objects, one that was seen in Dead Horse, Alaska, that went on to go to the Yukon. Then we had the next one that was down in, where was it? We had another one down over Maelstrom Air Force Base, where we had the UFO sightings a long time ago, and that one eventually went across to Lake Huron. And none of those objects that we saw were ever
unidentified.
Are still identified. We're supposed to come up with an answer. We had Jake Sullivan, who was going to be a representative from the White House, to come out and tell us he was going to have a specific team that was going to be put together to investigate this. And what came out of it? The shutdown of the UAP Disclosure Amendment 1.0 from Senator Schumer and Rounds, which are the top Democrats, which aligns to the party in the White House. But yet we had the representative from the head of the Department of Defense, Lloyd Austin, from the White House, to go ahead and actually lobby people in the House of Representatives to shut this thing down. So if they haven't talked about it, if they haven't shown it, that generally means there's something there we don't want to share with the American people, which screams cover up.
Well, and you have, Marek von Rennenkamp just today put out an interview that he did with Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. And Sean Kirkpatrick stated himself that he had provided feedback to Congress on the UAPDA and basically got it axed, got it gutted, helped gut the entire UAP Disclosure Act, because he thought there was a level of duplication by having the National Archives release all its records when AARO kind of believes it's mandated to do the same thing. So it's very for me as an Australian, it's frustrating that there's only one Australian senator that's taking this topic seriously, but it's encouraging that at least someone is continuing to ask questions. And I've been very fortunate, to your point and question you kind of were going at before, I've been very fortunate that I was able to engage Senator Wish-Wilson and develop a relationship with him and his office. And a lot of the questions that he has asked of those in positions of leadership and defense at these Senate estimates hearing, a lot of the questions that he's asked or submitted as questions on notice, I've actually drafted for him and provided them to him. So, and I don't say that to impress you or impress your audience, but to impress upon your audience that if you can develop a relationship with your elected representative and make it known to them how seriously you take this topic, and you as your constituent, you want them to take it seriously as well, you can help inform their thinking and their lines of inquiry on this topic, like I imagine so many have done with the likes of Burchett, with Luna, with Moskowitz and others as well. So you've got a chorus of congressmen and women that are today taking the topic of UAP more seriously than in the years past. And my only hope is that Australia gets there as well, because we as Aussies, and I imagine Nunya and Mark will agree, all we want as Aussies is for our government and Department of Defence to formally acknowledge that UAP is a phenomenon. We want it to be investigated, and we want some form of conclusion reached, the general public, as to what UAP are.
Now, to go ahead and talk about this, Mark von Rennenkamp, I've got his post up here on Twitter. Basically says new. Kirkpatrick says AARO has the non-retaliation portions of Grusch's IG complaint. If accurate, why are we only learning about this now? Yeah. Given Grusch's profile, why was this not clarified months ago, e.g., in the historical report? Completely at odds with Congress and UAPDA. Let me go ahead and play this clip here, and we'll love to hear your thoughts on it. Do you mind?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and we can bring up our friends from Australia to talk about where it's at. But since you brought this up, I'm sure audience wants to hear that. Let me go ahead and play this, and we'll go from here. Here we go.
So Grusch had gone in to talk to those two, ICIG and DODIG, and we had to get. They couldn't just give me the statement because it's protected under law enforcement whistleblower protections. So we had to go through this long process of getting the relevant data pulled out and separate it from his complaint about wrongful prosecution.
Retaliation, right.
We had to separate the data, if he had any, from that. The data that was provided, we cross-referenced with what we'd already known because we had interviewed most of the people that he had already talked to, and there was nothing new. There was nothing.
AARO received portions. I just want to get this clear. AARO received portions of Grusch's ICIG complaint.
We got the portions that did not have to do with retaliation.
Got it. So, okay, that's very helpful. Excellent. All right.
So there was nothing new. So they already knew about all the different stuff that Grusch was talking about. It's kind of what he's saying.
Yeah. And to your point, why was that disclosure not made in AARO's historical report? Well, why to Marek's point, why are we only learning about
remember,
this now?
We only got half of the historical report. We got the first half. We're still waiting for the second half, right?
That is true. And
so potentially it could be in the second part.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but the one thing I want to bring up that I've been saying about Kirkpatrick, not to give him a pass or anything, Kirkpatrick is the mouthpiece for AARO. He's also the mouthpiece for the DOD, right? Yeah, and if that's the case, he's following the direction coming from his boss. Whatever his boss and his handlers are telling him to say, that's what the guy is going to say. It's not like he's acting on his own free will and saying specifically what he feels or what he thinks. He's talking from the position of the government who he represents and all the shadowy departments that are behind him. So while we want to take Kirkpatrick and say, oh my God, the guy is horrible, he said this, he did this and everything, you got to look at it and say, well, he's the idol who's been put in front of everybody. It's the people that are behind him that are the true evildoers of what we're dealing with. Am I right on this?
Well, look, to your point, so Ronald Moultrie, before he retired, he testified before Congress in May 2022 with
the
Scott
UAP
Bray.
hearing, the one where we actually got some information, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so Ronald Moultrie was... early on, he was Kirkpatrick's boss. And so when Kirkpatrick testified at Gillibrand's hearing in April of, when was it? April 23.
Right.
Last
and
year.
Just so people understand really quick, that the heads of AARO had dual leadership, had dual reporting. One was from the ODNI, and the other one was from the Secretary for Defense for Intelligence, which would have been Intelligence and Security, which would have been Ron Moultrie in that particular position that he was in. Coming from Moultrie, where he was at, he was the administrative head over that department. So anything to do with administration, of who you report to, who you talk to, what you do, what you shouldn't do, how you wipe your ass, etc., is all coming from Moultrie. The other one is more of the kind of, we're going to talk about this and deal with it. So with that leadership that he had at that time, what do you expect?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, I certainly think Moultrie was stonewalling AARO's efforts because
yes,
it
absolutely,
like
100%.
As the holder of the purse strings, he wasn't getting off his backside and letting AARO do what it wanted to do and get on with the job. But from the ODNI side, I don't know. I mean, it's clear, you know, and Kirkpatrick states it in this interview with Marek that he was told to take the job. He didn't apply for the directorship of AARO. He didn't want it. He was basically, it was assigned to him as his last assignment as with the DoD. So I don't think he was ever all that enthused that he was given that as his last assignment. Whether that played a part in how seriously he took his position as director or leader of AARO. I mean, you hear from folks like Ross Coulthard that say that there are folks in AARO, and I imagine there are a lot of good people working within AARO that are intelligent that clearly did not agree.
Gary Reed. Remember, Gary Reed was one of Lou's bosses who was actually shutting down Disclosure, and he actually got fired not just for the stuff he did with Lou, but also sexual harassment and other stuff that was going on back in the day.
Inappropriate relationship or something like that. Yeah. So, I mean, it makes it. I wonder that now that Kirkpatrick has departed, is there an opportunity for AARO to redeem itself with a new, a fresh, fresh blood, new leader injected in the organization? We've got acting director Timothy Phillips. I don't know a whole lot about him. He's very much, I think, following the same vein as Kirkpatrick. But
he's got a job, right? I would guess he's got a family, and he has bosses, and he has committees telling him what to do. And more importantly, when you get out in front of people, we're going to vet everything that you're going to say before you say it.
Yeah, well, I think he has to speak the same words and toe the line that Kirkpatrick started off with. But I mean, it was long rumored that Carl Nell had been put forward as an option for AARO director replacement.
You
really need someone.
I heard that a year ago.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, if someone of
that's the first time I've said that, but I heard that about a year ago that Carl Nell was supposed to be coming in to go ahead and replace Sean Kirkpatrick. Now, Kirkpatrick went away, but the thing that didn't happen was Carl Nell wasn't brought in as the head of AARO.
Do you have any thoughts as to why that was the case? If you had sources telling you that he was being put forward as a possible replacement, if that's true, I wonder what happened in that. Why that never came to fruition? Why?
Because Disclosure does not have support, in my opinion, from the Biden administration. At the start of the Biden administration, there was support from Disclosure. But from when UAPDA 1.0 came out, there was pushback from the Biden administration, meaning the leader of the Secretary of Defense, part of the cabinet of Joe Biden, came back and was personally lobbying against UAPDA 1.0. And if that's the case, he's not doing that on his own. He's coming in because he has pressure from above and people from above telling him what to do. Because someone who's in that position, they may have their ideas of what they think about stuff, but they're not there to go ahead and represent what they think. They're there to represent what their administration believes. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, I remember, Biden was famously asked by a member of the press corps about, the question was, well, Barack Obama has talked about UAP,
I'll
and
answer
he
it.
talked about it in I think on a talk show, and Biden was asked a question, and what was his response?
Go talk to Barack.
Yeah, ask him again, So
He came back and said, yeah, go back and ask him again. Don't talk to Barack. Yeah, exactly. He wasn't going to have anything to do with that. And that's where he had the audience laughing, all the stuff going on like it wasn't a serious question. But I actually have to say, when that happened and he made that moment, he still had a wire going into his ear that was going down to the podium, where he got away from that as quickly as he possibly could, because they didn't want him to talk about that question.
Touch it. Yeah. Well, I'd be interested to, as an Aussie, to hear from you and your panelists as to, with November just around the corner, who do you think is best positioned to move us closer to transparency on the UAP topic? If Biden's not wanting to touch it, then
I think the best, people have been looking at this. My personal gut, which is coming from a higher self, not necessarily for me, just putting it out there, I think the best chance we have to bring disclosure forward is not the current administration, but if the Trump administration comes in, we've got a greater chance at disclosure now than we've had for the last 4 years. I wish it was different. I wish we had that opportunity today, but the last 4 years shows a consistent pushback. A year and a half ago, people said the Air Force and the DOD is going to they're trying to put the UFO disclosure toothpaste back in the tube. And you know what, Grant? They've been doing it pretty freaking well. And who's been doing it for them? Underneath the direction of whoever's behind them, Sean Kirkpatrick has been leading a unchallenged opposition to disclosure for the last 6 months, if not 10 months.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. One thing that I guess has, concerned is probably the word, is that I feel for Grusch in that he's the only one he's been standing on his own now for so long. You haven't had any other whistleblowers that have come out and really, stood by his side and said,
So it's been about a year.
Yeah, it's a bit over a year now. Yeah.
We had the one, and there were 40 others off to the side, but we had the one.
Yeah.
Now, Congress has maybe gone beyond that one. But the reality of it is, the American people, the public, everything since he came out and said all these great things, what's happened since Grusch came out? Not a hill of beans.
No, there hasn't been. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with, again, people think of him what you will, with James Fox's new documentary, The Program, that is scheduled to be released, I think, before the end of the year, possibly, where, there are, it's clear that he's obviously been talking to people that claim to be whistleblowers or primary witnesses, and it'll be interesting to learn if that.
But it's a pay-per-play documentary that's targeted at people who are interested in UFOs. That's the reality of it. It's going to be a great piece.
Oh, yeah.
There'll be little snippets that are going to come out, but the truth of the matter is, it's a very targeted piece of media that's being put together. It's not really going towards the mass market audience. It's going towards a very targeted view who already has an opinion on this.
Yeah, that's true. And will that be to the detriment of the conversation more broadly? Who knows? And
that's the thing where we had all of the stuff going on in November, December, January, February, March, April, May. Even now, he's still bringing stuff out from Sean Kirkpatrick. This whole message of what he's been projecting has gone truly unchallenged in the media. Yes, we've seen some great papers come out on the Hill or other areas or the brief coming from Christopher Mellon, but nothing's been picked up in the way that the message from the media machine coming from the DOD, the deep state, let's call it, to be anti-disclosure. That's where we've made a bunch of progress going forward, but it's been eroded to a point where we're almost back at where we were 3-4 years ago, except for the people in the community.
And well, look, you just need to remember back to when, that big red flag was waved when AARO did release its historical report. You had AARO cherry pick which media outlets it wanted to invite for that media, panel or media conference. I mean, News Nation was not invited. You had other outlets that weren't invited as well.
Liberation Times wasn't invited. A lot of different organizations that should have been there weren't there. And then also the way they could ask the questions was cherry picked ahead of time. It's
and
that
the optics of that, it does not bode well for transparency.
You know how it feels like? It feels like the same way we used to run press conferences.
Yeah.
Coming from the White House. We would have it where they'd have a list of the people they're going to call on, and the questions ahead of time are vetted, and they're only going to answer the questions they want and call on the people that they want, and they're going to go ahead and we're going to tell you a story. And you're going to ask us questions, but those questions are going to go ahead to tell our objective of what we're going for. It's the total media play, just like you've seen in so many freaking movies in the past. It's just, you've got this corrupt government, this corrupt organization that's there, and they're just controlling all aspects of the message. It just feels disgenuine.
Well, I'll tell you a comparable example. So one of the documents that I was able to secure for release through Australian FOIA a couple of years ago now, it was it was in response to the creation of this document, was in response to the questions that the then Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Mel Hupford, was asked by Senator Wish Wilson. Those questions by the Senator caught the Air Marshal completely off guard. So in the months following that line of questioning by Senator Wish Wilson at the Senate estimates, the Royal Australian Air Force put together a Chief of Air Force brief on UAP. And it's actually the most significant document that's come out of the Australian Department of Defence on UAP in more than a couple of decades. And one of the in the table of contents, one of the sections is strategic narrative. And the section on strategic narrative states, and this is verbatim, that the Royal Australian Air Force was able to somehow make this determination without investigating the topic since 96, without formally reviewing its position on UAP since 96, or without being then briefed by the US on any of the intelligence included in OVNI's preliminary assessment on UAP. The strategic narrative that the Royal Australian Air Force sold in that document was that UAP are likely to be one of three things: natural or benign or other benign phenomena, sensor errors, or human-made technologies, being foreign adversarial systems or our own systems. There was no consideration of the catch-all other bin that ODNI included in its preliminary assessment on UAP altogether. So, Australia is able to make this determination that, move along, folks. Again, there's nothing to see here. That's the story we want to sell the Australian public, because if we, the Royal Australian Air Force, Australian Department of Defence, now throw ourselves back in the ring and investigate UAP again, well, then that might create a perceived lack of public trust, because we've said in 96, there's nothing to it, folks. We know what's in our airspace. We know what's up there. It's not UFOs, UAP, that sort of thing. But then, and they're having to continue to toe that line, because if they now get back into the game, they're having to do a 180, which they've done a number of times, which I can talk about in a moment. But they're going to have to admit that, we don't know what's in our airspace, and we don't have air dominance. We don't have control over our skies. So that does not bode well for public trust. So that's one other reason why I think the Australian Department of Defence has been so reticent to take this topic seriously.
But I have to ask the question, Grant, like your friends here in the United States, I don't think we've ever had dominance in the air since we put up our first planes, ever.
It's an illusion. It's an illusion.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's an
again,
illusion
look at the-
against the people to figure we've got you safe. We have dominance in our air. We have dominance over the ground. We have dominance in the water. We have dominance in space, when the truth of the matter is, well, yeah, we do against humans, but there's these other things that are going on. Oh, not even close.
Yeah, and that's what I applaud men and women in Congress that want to get to the bottom of this conundrum and find out what the hell is going on, because this has been a topic that has been ridiculed and stigmatized for more than 75 years. And history repeats itself, right? Like AARO is really, for a lot of folks, Condon 2.0 or Project Blue Book 2.0. So, that's why I hope whoever is the eventual replacement of Kirkpatrick for AARO is a little bit more proactive in their engagement on the on getting answers and being more transparent, because AARO is, I mean, how much have we seen come out of AARO of all these cases that have been resolved? Well, why aren't more of them being transparent about it and disclosing it to the American public? I mean, if you go, I've asked questions of, Pentagon's spokesperson on UAP, Susan Goff, time and time again, questions that I feel may reveal some breadcrumbs on further lines of inquiry. And more often than not, you get a complete non-answer to the question that you ask. And that's the same of the Australian Department of Defence. And an example of that,
but it's almost like any politician. You ask anyone who ever comes on a news channel and they get asked a question, they never answer their question. They always talk about something else.
Exactly. They pivot and they want to talk about their strategic narrative. They want to talk about what they want to sell. But a classic example of what's so frustrating for me as someone that takes this topic seriously and wants my government to take it seriously as well, because I believe that the real threat to national security is if you've got members of the Australian Defence Force that are observing UAP, something that's anomalous that they can't really identify or reconcile, and they do not report that, then that is the real national security threat. Because what if it is foreign adversarial systems?
Let's be honest. Let's just be honest. Talk about national security. Let's just talk about this in a global sense. The Chinese. They're based on their observations. They're having cameras everywhere, looking over everything, assessing everything. They're watching their skies more than they're watching what's going on the ground, right?
Yeah.
And if so, they're already paying attention to all the things that are coming and going in their skies, and they're well aware of it. And I wouldn't doubt, too, that they wouldn't have some kind of level of watching the stuff that are going on in the skies over Australia, over in the skies over here in the United States. So the real people, they're trying to...
Australia and Pine Gap routinely.
Oh, God, yeah. So in that case, the only people they're really keeping it secret from as far as national security goes is not our enemies, because they're watching our skies and they're watching theirs. They know exactly what's going on. The people who they're keeping it out of in the area of national security is the citizens themselves.
Well, and the brave men and women at the front lines in the Defence Force. You've got pilots up there that aren't able to identify objects in the sky, and they're not being told what's going on. I mean, if it is foreign adversarial systems, you think they were the ones that should be made aware of any potential safety of flight risk or national security. It just boggles my mind that Australia is where the United States was a decade ago, where we don't have any formal reporting mechanisms in place. I mean, Ryan Graves saying they were so frustrated they had to submit hazard reports on what they were observing in 2014-15 because that was the only way they could get it in front of their
I'll get in trouble for this one, and I know I probably will if I'm not already in trouble for saying it, but I'll say it again. Ryan Graves, great concept. We have all these things going on in the skies, right? That people in the military, but more importantly, civilian pilots are seeing and encountering on almost a daily basis, right? And we need a way for these reports to be able to be made to the FAA and that information to get to Congress. I have to ask the question, how does that improve the safety of any pilot who will report this stuff? If you're going to get this information, the people who need to be made aware of it need to be trained on it. How to understand and behave on it is the freaking pilots. So if you want to get this information and get it there, the first group of people who need to have eyes on what all the other pilots are saying is the pilots themselves.
Yeah.
They need to incorporate that in their training materials to say, well, if you see this stuff based on what Bill, Bob, and Sang had seen in these different instances, this is how you're going to respond to it and get through it with safety, right?
Have you seen recently what Boeing has put out with its simulator, its flight simulator, where it's actually, I think it was Boeing, it's actually including UAP in its flight simulator for pilot training? As a test group.
Do they include the parts of the plane falling off now too?
But I agree with you. You know, pilots they need to obviously
bingo, because it's it's for safe aerospace. Americans for safe aerospace. And how do you increase safety? You have safety meetings going on. You share the information. You get it to the people who are there protecting the people they're flying for. You know, and it's great that information can also go to Congress in different areas, but the biggest person it needs to go to is the pilots themselves. That's my only thought about Americans for Safe Aerospace. You need to think about the pilots first.
Well, and the fact that it's there's permission to have that conversation among pilots, that reduces the stigma and ridicule that's long
bingo. It opens the door,
and that's a product, unfortunately, of the U.S. Department of Defense. They've stigmatized and ridiculed and ostracized anyone that's.
But this is actually the FAA and the rules potentially coming from the FAA. But got to remember, it's not necessarily coming from the DoD. Who does the DoD report to? The executive branch. And if the executive branch has been involved in all these different things, there's a puppet that's pulling the strings on this. Now, it may not be the president, because remember, the executive branch goes and is sustained from Republican to Democrat to Democrat to Republican to different administrations. It's going to be there over a period of time. So the executive branch itself may have more powers potentially than the president with regards to UFOs, and they're going to determine who or who not they're going to read into it and what they're going to tell them.
Yeah, I mean, quite possibly. I don't know, but I mean, it's the fact that you have, reports of 14 near misses that have been reported with the UAP, and that I think is what has influenced this drive or push to have reporting.
Okay, here's the thing. I got to bring this up. These our aircraft. Let's use this. Is moving along. It's a big jet, really nice and slow. Let's say it's moving 550 miles per hour, right? It's kind of going along like a turtle. You've got a UAP that comes out that's moving at 30,000 miles an hour, 11,000 miles per hour. So it's going around, being able to go like this, do all these different things around this craft. It's moving kind of slow. It can come over here, check it over here, check it out over there, and take off. And this thing is barely moved along. Now, if that's truly the case, from the perspective of the pilot, right, it looks like it's a safety risk from this pilot's view. But from the view of this little craft, it's moving around. It can do all these different things. Maybe it's moving at a different time dilation. They're like, oh my God, we're like so many feet away from this thing. It was barely moving. It's just moving along, and we're just zipping around this thing, doing all these things. There's no way in hell we could ever have hit it. So from our perspective, we see it as a safety risk, because if we're going 550 miles an hour and we have to make a quick change, there's reaction time and all these things. But this little craft here isn't affected by gravity, isn't affected by us, and it can do whatever it needs to be. And if it sees this thing moving out of the way, it's going to immediately zip away, which means there's no risk. So we can claim that there is, from our perspective, that there's a near miss or things going on, but when's the last time we've heard about a UFO crashing into any of our jets? No one's ever brought it up yet, have they?
Well, there was one incident from the I don't know what year it was.
There's
but
times when they actually went and they chased the UFOs in the upper atmosphere, and our pilots lost consciousness because we were doing stupid shit that our pilots and our planes couldn't handle.
Yeah, but I mean, to your point, if an aviator has to take evasive maneuvers and they end up getting into a death spiral and they crash, then that, you know, as Ryan Graves said, procedures are often written in blood.
So it's safety,
when something
right?
happens that procedures change, and so that's why I think it's a step in the right direction that reporting exists to reduce the stigma and encourage the conversation to be had. But my point is, Australia's not even there yet. We're not even in a position.
Well, we need to get this on a global thing, because you know what? All the commercial pilots that are flying around everywhere with all the flights that are going on, it's not just one pilot that needs it. It's tens of thousands of pilots that need to have this information.
Yeah, I agree. And sadly, that opening scene from Close Encounters of the Third Kind is very much where Australia is. You know, you have, if there are pilots that are seeing something, they're not going to report it because of the stigma that's associated with the topic and the fact that nothing will happen to their report. And the Australian Department of Defence is basically saying that it will only consider implementing an investigatory body, say comparable with AARO, if there is a threshold met on the volume and credibility of reports that it receives. Well, how can it reach a threshold of reports if there's no reporting mechanisms in place? How are they going to receive reports if there's no means to report anything? I mean, they're saying that, well, current safety and safety protocols exist that are enough to capture UAP, but I don't believe that's the case, because I've looked at the Defense Aviation Safety Authority's regulation and looked at the occurrence report form and reporting mechanisms, and I don't believe it's sufficient to capture anything pertaining to UAP observations or near misses associated with UAP. So zero reporting mechanisms equals zero reports, in my opinion, in Australian airspace. So, and that's why I think Australia's at a place where the US was decades ago, and I think it's going to have to take something pretty significant to happen in the United States for Australia to get off its backside and stop chasing its tail and try and get in front of the 8 ball on this topic, because it's been playing catch up for quite a long time now.
Absolutely. Now, Andy, I have to ask you a question. Do you think United Kingdom is equally handicapped?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, definitely. We've just gone through a new change of government.
Oh God, yeah, I've seen the burning in the streets.
Oh yeah.
The protesting reminds me of France.
Yeah, well, come to the United Kingdom. I think we've now got a government that's got actually quite a small mandate. It doesn't have a large mandate from the population anyway. My personal feeling is I can't see this government lasting the full term. They've come in with a 37%, I think it is, mandate, which is very low. The way that the voting is in this country, first past the post, Labour have got an awful lot of MPs with not very many votes, actually. I don't see any of our MPs even bringing this subject up in Parliament at all. I would hope potentially the reform candidates might one day get on board, but they've only got 5 candidates. They're getting pilloried by the mainstream press at the moment. I can't see anything's going to change, certainly for this term of Parliament.
Right. So you're still in the same spiral of where you've been.
Yeah, the same as Grant, Australia, Canada, basically all of the Five Eyes.
But United States might be going through a change.
Well, yeah, it's certainly an interesting time for you guys. Ours was quite interesting, but our actual lead up to the vote was pretty damn boring. You guys over in America have got it quite a bit more interesting, I think. What with everything that's happened and happening.
Oh my God! And if you have, and if anyone on this show hasn't done their research and hasn't gone on Twitter and start looking into some of the reasons of what happened last Saturday actually happened, and the incompetency that went out from the Secret Service, the Department of Homeland Security, and all these different areas, and you just look at this and you're just like, it's just getting worse and worse, and it's just like,
I'm watching. I've never been interested in American politics. I'm British, I've, to be honest, barely got any interest in my own countries. But certainly since what happened last weekend, whether you like Trump or hate him or whatever, what happened is a travesty. It's only, it's thankful that he survived. Unfortunately, somebody innocent died. And heads need to roll, whether it was Biden or whether it was Trump.
Whatever it was, but I have to say this person had to be groomed for a long period of time, because I have to say, how many people do you know that are 20 years old in the United States or in the world that are on some form of social media? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's quite, I'm technically old now, there's an 8-year-old child still up here.
Oh, yeah.
And I can be crass and everything, like an 8-year-old child can be. But it's I hope, and I'm not being political about what I'm going to say.
No, just say it. Say what you put politics aside. Say what you feel, Andy.
Yeah, I hope for the American people that if Trump gets in, that he will be more on the side of actually releasing things. I think he's got a lot of axes to grind. All of the mudslinging.
Well, he has promised that if anything, when he gets back in, if he gets back in, let's call it that, he will release 100% of everything on the Kennedy files. And if Kennedy was taken out, potentially because he was wanting to bring out the information about UFOs, we're going to learn about it.
Well, let's hope he actually is true to his word. Actions speak louder than words, don't they? But
it turns out there's only one. Just saying, from history, I'm only 56, but out of my history of being alive, the only president that I've seen that's actually saying, here's the things I'm going to do, the only person that actually checked them off the list has been Trump. Because I remember going to college, we had, who was it? Bush 1 was said, I'm going to be the education president. He didn't do shit for it. And so many different things. We've heard promises and promises. So we'll see where it goes. You know what? I'm just looking out, forget who was going to get there in the office. I'm just looking out for the people of America and the world, for that matter.
Yeah, I'm about to have a coughing fit, but
yeah,
you can hold it off. Yeah, the mandate that these politicians always bring out, don't they? Oh, we're going to do this, that, and the other. They actually get in, and then it's all swept under the carpet, and they move on. I'm going to go silent in a minute too. Excuse me.
Yep, go clear out that loogie. Grant, well, there's a perspective coming from the United Kingdom, and I think kind of lands with the United States and where you're at in Australia. You want to see more things open up. You want to see more information come across. You're tired of the shutdown and the embargo on the truth, I think.
Yeah, look, UK and Australia and New Zealand, we're very much in the same boat. I mean, there's, New Zealand is not taking the topic seriously, clearly, as well. It's only the US and Canada is, at least following the US's lead, and it's got its Sky Project Canada, which it's supposed to release a report, I believe, in the coming months. So it would be nice for both members of Parliament in the UK and members of Parliament in Australia and Senators of Australia to start asking more questions and finally realize, well, our US brothers and sisters are taking this topic so seriously. Well, maybe we should start doing the same, because what if there is something to it? And that's just so frustrating that, what's really frustrating for me is Australia is so lockstep with the United States on really almost every other defense initiative, but we're the closest of allies, yet we couldn't be further apart when it comes to the UAP topic. And that's just so frustrating. And I'm sure Andy would agree with that and say that for the UK as well.
Andy?
Yeah, now we can speak again. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Susan, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I think really us in England and the other, Five Eyes have got some sort of a agreement with the US. I think the US has virtually said, hey, this doesn't exist, leave it alone. Anything comes up, just let us handle it, blah, blah, blah. And I think we've palmed it off and put it in the US hands. That's what I think. Because, England's the same as us. We're not backward. There's a lot of things happening over here, US UAP related. And same with England, but it's all swept under the carpet and nothing to see here. It's just handed over to the US. I think we've got some sort of agreements with them, that America handles all that.
Yeah. Now, on that part of having agreements and such, Grant, have you seen some of the recent things from Jim Semivan that's coming from his recent interviews talking about those kind of agreements?
I've started the interview that he's done with James Iandoli. I haven't got through the whole of it yet, so you might need to fill me in and apprise me on...
No, I've just heard some of the mentions where they've talked about that particular part and everything. It just sounds interesting and all heck to understand what it came down to is there's particular agreements we're not allowed to go ahead and talk about. If you want to call it, we have a pushback from the government, but we have an agreement with the government potentially to go ahead and gain technology from the non-human intelligence, but we have to give up humans who are supposedly we're going to get back coming out of it for their sharing of, if you want to call it, technology with us. But for the most part is coming out of the agreement is we're not allowed to talk about or disclose anything with regards to the non-human intelligence being around, basically playing in the pushback of everything, kind of showing there's this something that Nick has brought up on the, asking the question before the show, but he's also asked many people, what about these agreements that might be out there? What do you think about that?
I mean, look, it's one of the most fantastical aspects of this whole conversation, isn't it? I mean, I'm not closed off to the idea. I'm certainly open to it. If again, we can only speculate that.
Right.
If that is a reality, then I mean that's a game changer altogether, isn't it?
Right. But I have to say though, if their technology is so advanced, we can stop them. We can maybe detect them. There's nothing we can do potentially to interact with them. Why would they need an agreement with us if they're already so advanced beyond what we can handle?
Yeah. Why would they just not take what they want? And why would they need an agreement?
And potentially, if they've been here for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, they may have been involved in the creation of humanity as we know it.
Yeah. I mean, if when hundreds of years ago, when we we're on the explorers and discovering new continents. I mean, did the English, when they discovered Australia, did they form agreements with the indigenous Aboriginal population on governing the lands and so on? What did they do? They killed them. They wiped them out.
Right.
Tasmania, the state of Tasmania, its indigenous population was completely wiped off the map by the English.
Look at the North America, completely wiped clean.
So why would we think that an NHI would be any different, unless it's motivation and intent, which we can only speculate on, is of peace and love and light and that sort of stuff. I mean, it's an interesting question to
but that's what they
on.
thought about in Central America when the conquistadors came. Look at this. They're bright and they're shiny. They're also beautiful. Look at the ships coming over the horizon, how great they look. But look what happened when it actually took place.
Yeah, that goes back to my point about what the Brits did to the indigenous population in Australia. So
yeah.
So I mean, it would be foolish of me to close myself off to any idea, but like anything, we can entertain an idea, but we can't really take it any further than speculation until any supporting data and evidence is provided. And that's why I think, unfortunately, there is just too many folks on social media are too quick to make that leap and suspend their discipline and put in what someone comes and makes a claim on. You have to certainly, I don't need to believe a story to find it entertaining or interesting. But again, if you're really wanting to take this topic seriously and you want to research topics of topics that are of interest to you, you have to do your diligence and try and verify claims that have been put forward.
Yeah,
and I think it's any good researcher will do their best to stay neutral on any claim and try and then find supporting evidence to support it or refute it.
Right, and hopefully, and no matter what researcher we're talking about, they're always going to have some kind of personal bias based on the experience and how they got there.
100%. And it's not always easy to abandon your bias and biases. We all have them. I know I have them, and
So
I've just been trying to go off what information the Australian government discloses to me through FOIA. I'm going to give you an example of another frustration I have with the Australian Department of Defence. I haven't touched on this with you, but I know that probably Nunya and Mark will know of it. So, Senator Wish Wilson in June of last year submitted a question on notice, which is like a written question to the Australian Department of Defence, asking. This was after Kirkpatrick came out in May and said, yes, there was a Five Eyes forum on UAP. Well, Senator Wish Wilson submitted a question on notice to the Australian Department of Defence and asked to this effect, did Australia attend the Five Eyes briefing, the United States Five Eyes briefing? Did it attend the United States?
And they denied it at first, didn't they?
They denied it.
Yeah,
and a month
I covered
later,
that.
The 19th of July, they came back and said, no, Australia did not attend the United States briefing on UAP.
We weren't there. Not even. Why did you even ask?
Exactly. You move along. There's nothing to it. No, we don't. It's all fluff. There's nothing there. And then so Senator Wish Wilson continued his line of inquiries. In part due to the ongoing.
Well, wasn't it disclosed from the United States side first that Australia was there?
No, it wasn't. So a follow-up question on notice that Senator Wish Wilson then submitted on the 2nd of November. So this disclosure from Australian Department of Defence came on the 19th of July that, no, we didn't attend the United States briefing on UAPs, the Five Eyes Forum. And then on the 2nd of November, Senator Wish Wilson submitted some follow-up questions on notice, and one of the questions was, did Australia receive an invitation to attend the Five Eyes Forum on UAP? If yes, why did Australia not accept the invitation? Because we were operating on the assumption that what the Australian Department of Defence was telling us, that Australia didn't attend Five Eyes briefing, we were working on the assumption that information was accurate and truthful. And so the Department of Defence then on the 15th of December comes back and says, oh, yes, a defense representative at the embassy in Washington, D.C. attended. And so there's been no real explanation provided from the Australian Department of Defence since as to how they could get it so wrong. when so many people, not just me, but you had Brandy Vincent for Defense Scoop in the US, you had an Australian journalist here, Jamison Murphy, you had others submitting questions to the Australian Defence Media, you had Senator Wish Wilson asking all of these questions of the Australian Department of Defence. Did Australia attend the Five Eyes Forum on UAP? If not, did it receive an invitation? And then they do this backflip admission saying, oh, yeah, no, we did attend. And they've provided no explanation, no satisfactory explanation to date, saying how they could get it so wrong. The latest documents I received through FOIA said, oh, no, we didn't do our due diligence and find out. We didn't know at the time in July of last year that someone had attended, when actually fact they did. So then we found out later in the year they defended. So it's either a catastrophic screw up and level of incompetence, and or there's a level of deception in there as well. Now, Ross Coulthard always floats the line, always assume a screw up before a conspiracy. So it could well be a screw up, but that's a pretty significant one. So how can Australian taxpayers going forward have any degree of confidence that our elected representatives are going to have questions that they ask of people in positions of leadership and defence? They're going to get their questions answered truthfully and accurately. We can't. I've lost all confidence in the Australian Department of Defence that they can respond to my lines of inquiry and the Senator's lines of inquiry accurately and truthfully, because they've shown that, and that's evidenced by this catastrophic stuff up. Yet they said, oh, no, we didn't attend, and then, yes, we did attend. So that's unfortunately what gives you an insight as to what we're having to deal with, just with the bloody lack of transparency in Australia.
Yeah, I hear you completely. You bring up good points that I agree with completely. Now, if I could, Laura Campbell, you've had your hand up for a while.
Hi, I have a question for Grant. Did you look at all at the Harold Holt Naval Communications Station in Australia? I know that they work with the Pine Gap, and it's that weird hexagon-shaped array of antenna. I know Ross Coulthard had talked about it being used to track UAPs. And what's interesting is we also moved our space surveillance telescope there from New Mexico. So I think a lot is going on. Do you have anything that you know about that?
Yeah, I haven't personally researched the Harold E. Holt base. I've dug very briefly into Pine Gap, which is a fascinating and interesting conundrum in itself. But no, I haven't done any research on the Harold Holt base, but certainly Ross has. And there was an incident, I believe, in the 80s that Ross covers in his book, In Plain Sight, where there was a woman and two police officers that were involved in a sighting of a UAP above or surrounding the Harold Holt base. So it's I mean, and that's it's intriguing that you do have, like in the US, Australia has a long history of anomalous activity reported above and surrounding these top secret military installations, like Harold Holt Base, like Pine Gap, like you've got Maralinga in South Australia and Woomera, where in the 1960s, Australia launched, as a top secret facility, Australia launched its first satellite into orbit, and my uncle, my mother's brother, was the project manager on that resat satellite, and there was a lot of UAP and anomalous activity reported above the Woomera base for many years in the 60s and the 70s. So we have common link with our US brothers and sisters that we've got UAP activity that's been reported in decades past above these top secret military installations as well. But no, short answer to your question, I haven't done any homework on the Harold Holt base.
I have to ask the question back to Laura. Laura, have you or your team done any remote viewing on those locations?
No.
Oh.
But I have heard other famous ones look at the Pine Gap, saying it's kind of like a international station for comings and goings of craft.
Oh, wow.
But that was years ago. But I have not. But I may just look at it.
So, Laura, are you familiar with Mount Zeal, which is a couple hundred kilometers northwest of Pine Gap?
I've heard of it, but I haven't looked at it.
So the famous remote viewer, was it McGonigal? is it what's the I can't remember.
Joe McGonigal from yeah.
So he was, and forgive me if I'm getting it wrong, but he was part of, I think, was it Project 1888 or some project, remote viewing project, and this was covered by the Wi-Fi.
He's part of the Monroe Institute that does a lot of stuff with regards to remote viewing and stuff along those lines, and he's also tied back to Colonel John Alexander, who's part of the original team. It's the Stanford Research Institute that did all the initial, if you want to call it, delving into and opening up and demystifying a lot of stuff that goes on in remote viewing.
Yeah, so I learned through the Wi-Files, which is a very, very popular channel. With they covered off on the remote viewing that he did, and there is actually audio or visual footage of him talking about one of the targets, one of the hits that he got was this place called Mount Zeal, which is about a couple hundred kilometers northwest of Pine Gap, where he claimed to remote view an underground base at this Mount Zeal. Now, whether it was operated by non-human intelligence or it was just deep underground, deep underground military base, not sure, but that was a fascinating tidbit that I learned just through my personal research on this topic. But that would certainly be an interesting one for you to explore if you're interested in.
And the works that Ingo Swann looked into, another great remote viewer. There's so many great remote viewers we've had in our past that are just phenomenal people. Nick, you have your hand up, my friend. Welcome back.
Yes. Grant, do you think the spaceship that Ross said that was big as a football field is in Australia, or is it in a different country?
I think it's in a different country. I think he. I don't believe it's in Australia. No, I think it's in a foreign country. I have no idea.
Foreign to Australia, yes. Someplace else in the other 143 countries we have around the world. So, hey, it could be in the United States. You never know where it's going to be. Could be in Egypt. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, if it exists too. I mean, we don't know if Ross has been fed disinformation. That's an option as well. But if it does exist, it'd be certainly fascinating to find out where it is.
Oh gosh, yes. I mean something like that to be brought forward to humanity. Because here's the thing: we need that big sighting. We need that big piece of evidence to be able to be lugged around to show people in humanity. Because the reality is we had people like David Grusch come out over a year ago to talk about these different things, and even with all the fantastical things that he's said, it moved us forward a little bit, but not that much. So I think humanity, if I might be wrong in saying this, we need that big chunk of evidence, that big sighting seen by hundreds, if not thousands of people, to raise the flag and say, yeah, we've got something here beyond what the people who are wearing the tinfoil hats are saying, that this stuff is real.
And do you think, Thomas, that there's a better chance of that coming from the scientific community with the likes of the Galileo Project or, say, UAPX?
I personally feel that Avi Loeb and anything that he does is compromised. Just saying. The way that he came forward and shot down the research that was happening in Ukraine and the findings that came out of Ukraine from the National Academy of Sciences Astronomy Division, per se, the way that Sean Kirkpatrick drove up 3.5 hours unannounced, rang his doorbell, talked to him about it, and the next morning he puts out this paper going and taking all the information that came out of Ukraine and throwing it under the table. And even though they came back with a rebuttal and said, well, here's this proof of that, here's that proof, he hasn't addressed it and just left it on the table since. For me, he lost all credibility when he brought that out, because here we have a team of scientists who have been researching this going back to 2018, if not earlier, seeing results, documenting it, figuring out a process, trying to say, this is what we're seeing. This stuff is everywhere. We're seeing this kind of craft, the phantoms. We're seeing the cosmics. Here's the kind of results we're seeing. Here's the light spectrum they're in. Very scientific paper. Just for him to go ahead and shoot that down after he got a visit from the head of AARO, it just feels slimy. It feels dirty. And if that's the case of how he's going to do it, remember, he was part of the intelligence community in Israel when he was there. So he's got a tie back early in his career with keeping things secret. It just feels what I get what they're trying to bring forward, but here's the thing. They've had all these potential observatories. Have we gotten one result on anything that's been seen yet from their observatories? Or is it still quiet?
Yeah, I don't know where they're at in putting out the data that they've collected, but I'm not sure. I don't know the extent of that. That on the Ukraine reporting, so I can't.
You'll have to check that into it. It's the National Academy of Sciences from Ukraine, the paper they put out on the sightings. And here's the thing: as soon as I saw their paper and what they were seeing, something called the phantoms, I have video footage of the phantoms. The craft that are moving really fast, they absorb all light and they do their things. I've got one video of the crafts hovering over the city of a city in Malta, just spinning around. All of a sudden, it accelerates, goes off to about what I calculated somewhere between 11 and 13,000 miles per hour. Just takes off, but it's not the one. There's a couple more that come across. The last one goes across, goes off in the back distance of the shot, goes off camera, but then comes back, and it goes and it intercepts a jet fighter, and based on the distances, it's within 70 feet of the jet fighter, and this jet fighter is going about 500 miles an hour. This craft is going somewhere between 11 and 13,000 miles per hour. It just comes in, gets right in front of the nose of the jet, levels off, and just freaking books off the side of the screen. So when I saw the reports, like, yes, I've got footage of the exact same thing they're talking about. So I knew what they were talking about was real. The other thing that was interesting about it is in their results, and when my results are, you see the craft, it's not moving slowly across the screen. It's skipping from the location to location to location to location, almost like this thing is moving in a different time dilation, or it's moving just that fast that you're not seeing it smooth or whatever it is. It's literally jumping between. It's moving so fast, it's got distance between the frames. And that's where you see so many videos of UFOs coming out where it's this really nice, smooth movement. Everything's going off. And I'll look at that and say, okay, I know you're fake. Because once you've seen good footage of an actual UFO, you know what to look for. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've listened to the latest reality check from Ross Coulthard, but he had Brazilian UAP researcher Ronnie Vernet on.
Yeah, he's actually coming on here.
Oh, great! Yeah,
shortly.
I found his, his account very, very interesting and compelling. What he's captured and seen down there. So I hope and suspect that he makes another expedition down there to try and capture more data.
Yeah, there's another expedition on the calendar, I believe, for, I can't talk about maybe I shouldn't be talking about this, but I know there is another expedition coming up down the future, and I believe, I'm not going to say with who, but Ronnie is not going to be alone.
Well, look, I mean, I applaud his efforts. I think we need more of that, folks that are taking upon themselves to get out there and just capture data and then put it out there and for it to be open sourced and peer reviewed.
Because here's the thing. I just want to bring this out really quick. On the East Coast of the United States, we have one kind of UFO phenomenon. On the West Coast of the United States, we have a different kind of UFO phenomenon. And what we're seeing down in South America, they've got something similar. There's different stuff going on down there. And I think the kind of stuff that you're going to see is going to be different from up here is because you don't have the Air Force, you don't have the NRO, you don't have all these different agencies that are surveilling everything that's going on. We don't have these protection grids going around our country to keep stuff out. So there's going to be more of an ability of these craft to be coming out and doing things and interacting with the population because you don't have this big military industrial complex keeping everything away and potentially agreements. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So do you think that adds to the, if you listen to what Danny Sheehan and even Carl Nell says, that this idea of catastrophic disclosure where maybe all of the ramifications from an uncontrolled disclosure, but also the risk of having disclosure come from a country that's not the United States. What if it is we know that Brazil is taking a keen interest on the UAP, on the phenomenon.
Brazil has seen stuff for a long time. Chile has seen stuff. Peru has seen things. I would say majority of the countries in South America have seen it, if not a lot of countries in Central America. Bring it on. All I can say is, if the truth is out there, I don't care if it doesn't need to come from the United States. If they're that much that they need to cover it up, let them do it. But if it's going to come from something else, frickin' bring it on, is what I say.
Yep. Here. Yeah. Well, that's all we want. We all want there to be transparency on what's going on. We all want data. We all want information. And unfortunately, the obfuscation that's come from the U.S. Government since 80 plus years is, I don't think is going to change anytime soon. Unfortunately, I think we'd all like it to, but we're only exposed to breadcrumbs, and I think we're going to need something pretty big to move the needle on, whether it be another.
I thought about this for the longest time. I think we have a better chance of getting the truth and getting things brought forth from the non-human intelligence than we actually have that chance with our United States government.
Well, what incentive does NHI to have to reveal itself? We can speculate on what their intent is.
Well, if there's potentially a worldwide catastrophe coming and they need to get us to line up to something.
2027, don't you? Yeah.
Well, yeah, 2027, but we're in a point now where the poles are going through a magnetic flip. We're coming into a different part of the Milky Way galaxy. There's a lot of stuff that could cause the Earth to go ahead and shake up and wipe out the surface again. What a better time to try and connect with your people before they're washed away.
Very true.
Yeah, watching Vid says it right there. Damn, every 6 or 12,000 years on Earth, catastrophes. Yes, it happens again and again. But I have to say, thank you, Grant, for coming out today. It's been one heck of a great show, talking about disclosure in general, talking about what's going on in Australia, because you're part of the world. You represent a large community out there, and it's important for all of us, whether you're in Australia, United Kingdom, New Zealand, or anywhere, to go ahead and bring forward the truth, because this is truly a global phenomenon.
Well, I really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate you having me on. I'm sorry if I sucked up the air and didn't give your panelists time to talk.
Oh no, they were quiet. Usually they'd be popping the hands up all the time. That's why I've been kind of going with it. But it's been a great conversation, Grant. Yeah, absolutely phenomenal.
I've enjoyed it. Appreciate you having me on and sharing some insights with your audience.
Yeah, if I could hang up until the show's over and stuff. I'm sure some people want to talk to you in the back if you got a couple minutes afterwards. But if I can, I want to go ahead and thank the people for your super chats today. Holy cow, thank you very much. Appreciate the love and support of everything Disclosure tonight. Remember, every super chat that came in goes back into the production of our show. Most importantly, I want to thank Faze Will. Thank you very much for your super chat, my friend, for starting it off tonight. Shelley Montgomery. Thank you, Shelley. I appreciate that support. Ian Harding, of course, and Shermanator Osborne, our resident ancientologist. Thank you all for your love and support of everything Disclosure tonight. More importantly, I want to thank our friends who have been hanging out in the chat tonight, because the chat is where it's at. Still in the chat right now. I'll go ahead and thank Andy W., Aubrey McLeod, Charles Kerr, Delta, Echo, Elwan Hubbard, Eli McGinnis has been here as well. Keep it pouring, my friend. Firefly, Ian Watts, official, J-Cat, Kelly, Kathy Brote and her piercing blue eyes. Kathy's here as well. King Bull, Morgan, Resonate, Shermanator Osborne, the Cosmic Cowboy, and watching Vids 2.0. How about that? Also want to thank our friends who have been in the back today. Andy W., thanks for coming out today, Andy.
Oh, thank you very much. And Grant, thank you very much again for joining us. And you've got a new sub from me on X, at Grant Lavac, everybody. Yeah, subscribe.
Yeah, many thanks, Andy. And yes, if anyone's interested to follow my journey on the topic, like Andy said, I'm primarily on X, just at Grant Lavac. If you're interested to follow the live streams and podcasts that I do, it's called The Unexplained Rundown. Just search for it on YouTube or search for my name. You'll find it there and on Spotify as well. So feel free to check it out if it's of interest.
Let's see if I can find you. Here you go on YouTube. I will go ahead and share that in the chat. Do us a favor, Chad. If you, I'm going to go ahead and share a link to Grant's podcast. Please go ahead and support his podcast. Go ahead and subscribe. It's great to have him here today and everything. Thank you for your love and support of everything Grant does. Also, let's see. We had Laura Campbell. Thanks for your questions today, my dear lady.
You're welcome. Thank you, Grant. Good job. Keep up the work. Keep pushing forward.
Many thanks. I appreciate the comments.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great having you here tonight, Grant. Thank you for coming out tonight. It's been wonderful. And as we usually say at the end of every night, eyes open, no fear, be safe, everyone. But
go back to Party City where you belong.
Absolutely. We'll catch you on the flip side. Good night, everybody. Love you. I'll come back now. Here. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.